The late evening sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Grand Plaza Hotel as a tall, well-built man in casual attire walked through the revolving doors. His name was Shaquille Anderson, though most people in the business world knew him simply as Big Shaq. Despite owning a chain of successful hotels across 3 continents, he preferred keeping a low profile and often visited his properties unannounced to ensure everything ran smoothly. Tonight was one of those surprise visits to his newest acquisition in downtown Los Angeles. He had deliberately dressed down in jeans and a simple black t-shirt, his usual style when he wanted to experience his hotels as a regular guest would. The lobby was bustling with tourists and business travelers, all being attended to by the hotel staff with varying degrees of efficiency. As Shaq approached the front desk, he noticed a young receptionist who was busy scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging the guests waiting in line. Her nameplate read Rita. When it was finally his turn, she didn't even look up from her device. "I'd like to check in," Shaq said politely, placing his ID on the counter. Rita glanced up briefly, her eyes scanning his casual attire with obvious disapproval. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Actually, I don't. I was hoping you might have a room available for tonight," he replied, maintaining his composure. The receptionist let out an exaggerated sigh. "Sir, this is a luxury hotel. We don't typically accommodate walk-ins, especially during peak season." She gave his clothes another dismissive look. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the budget hotel down the street?" A few other guests in line shifted uncomfortably, picking up on Rita's rudeness. The older bellhop standing nearby, Mr. Chen, who had worked at the hotel for over 2 decades, recognized Shaq immediately. His eyes widened, but Shaq gave him a subtle shake of the head, signaling him to stay quiet. "I understand this is a luxury hotel," Shaq responded calmly. "Money isn't an issue. I'd be happy to take any available suite." Rita rolled her eyes. "Sir, our suites start at $2,000 per night. Based on your..." She paused, looking at his worn sneakers. "Current presentation, I don't think that would be suitable. We have certain standards to maintain." By now, other staff members had started to notice the commotion. The head concierge, Mrs. Rodriguez, was making her way over, having recognized the familiar voice of their owner. But Shaq raised his hand slightly, stopping her in her tracks. He wanted to see how this would play out. "I appreciate your concern for the hotel's standards," Shaq said, his voice remaining steady. "However, I believe I can afford it. Would you mind checking the system for any available rooms?" Rita let out another dramatic sigh. "Fine, but don't waste my time. We'll need a $5,000 deposit for incidentals, and that's before the room charge." She smirked, clearly expecting him to back down. Instead, Shaq pulled out his black card and placed it next to his ID. Rita's eyes flickered to the card, then to his ID, and suddenly, all color drained from her face. Her hands began to tremble as she read the name again: Shaquille Anderson, CEO and owner, Anderson Hotel Group. The lobby had grown eerily quiet. Mr. Chen was trying to suppress a smile, while Mrs. Rodriguez stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Other staff members who had gathered around began to whisper among themselves. "Is everything all right, Rita?" Shaq asked kindly, noting her sudden change in demeanor. "You seemed quite concerned about the hotel standards a moment ago." "I share that concern, actually. Standards of service are particularly important to me." Rita's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Her phone, which had been her constant companion throughout their interaction, slipped from her trembling hands onto the counter with a loud clatter. "Mr. Anderson, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." She stammered, her previous confidence evaporating into thin air. Shaq raised his hand gently. "Let's discuss this in private." "Mrs. Rodriguez," he called out to the head concierge, who immediately stepped forward. Would you mind showing me to my office? I believe it's time we had a conversation about customer service standards. As Shaq walked away with Mrs. Rodriguez, the lobby burst into hushed conversations. Rita stood frozen behind the counter, the reality of her actions sinking in. Mr. Chen, the wise old bellhop, patted her shoulder as he walked past, quietly saying, "Never judge a book by its cover, young lady. Some lessons we learn the hard way." The story of what happened that evening would become a legendary tale among the hotel staff, passed down to every new employee during training. It served as a powerful reminder that respect and professional service should be extended to every guest, regardless of their appearance. As for Rita, the meeting in Shaq's office would change her perspective forever, though that's a story for another part. The walk to the office felt like the longest journey of Rita's life. Each step down the plush carpeted hallway echoed with the weight of her mistakes. Mrs. Rodriguez led the way, while Mr. Anderson, Big Shaq himself, followed behind, his presence commanding yet curiously calm. The security cameras that Rita passed every day now seemed to mock her, having recorded every second of her condescending behavior in the lobby. When they reached the owner's office, Rita was surprised by its simplicity. Unlike the ornate decor of the hotel, the room was modestly furnished with family photos and industry awards lining the walls. A large window overlooked the city skyline, now painted in deep purples and oranges as the sun set. "Please, have a seat," Shaq gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. Rita sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mrs. Rodriguez remained standing by the door, her expression unreadable. "Would you like some water?" Shaq asked, his voice gentler than Rita expected. She nodded, unable to find her voice. As he poured water from a crystal pitcher, Rita noticed his hands. They were rough and calloused, not the manicured hands she'd expect from a luxury hotel chain owner. "Sir, I can't begin to express how sorry I am," Rita finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Shaq settled into his chair and took a thoughtful sip from his own water glass. "Before we discuss what happened downstairs, I'd like to tell you a story," he said, leaning back. 25 years ago, I was turned away from a hotel much like this one. I had just closed my first major real estate deal, but I was wearing clothes from a discount store because every penny I had was invested in my business." Rita's eyes widened as he continued, "The receptionist that day didn't just deny me a room, she made me feel less than human. That moment changed my life. I promised myself that if I ever succeeded, would build hotels where everyone would be treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background." Tears welled up in Rita's eyes as the impact of her actions hit her. She had become exactly the kind of person who had once hurt her boss. "I'm not going to fire you, Rita," Shaq said, causing her head to snap up in surprise. "That would be too easy, and it wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I have a different proposal." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, placing a folder on the desk. "Mr. Anderson and I have been developing a new training program," she explained. "We call it Walking in Their Shoes. For the next month," Shaq continued, "you'll work alongside guests from all walks of life. You'll help the housekeeping staff make beds, assist the bellhops with luggage, and shadow our concierge team. You'll learn why every guest who walks through our doors deserves respect, regardless of their appearance." Rita nodded eagerly, grateful for the second chance. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself," she said firmly. "There's more," Shaq added. "I'm also enrolling you in our management training program." Rita's confusion must have shown on her face because he smiled and explained, "You have something many people lack. You've experienced firsthand how not to treat guests, and now you'll learn how to treat them right. That kind of perspective is valuable, but only if you're willing to learn from it." As the meeting concluded, Mr. Chen was waiting outside the office. His kind eyes crinkled with warmth as he saw Rita emerge. "Ready for your first lesson?" he asked, holding up a bellhop's uniform in her size. That evening marked the beginning of Rita's transformation. Her first task was helping Mr. Chen with the late-night luggage rush. As she struggled with heavy suitcases and learned to navigate the service elevators, she began to understand the complexity of hotel operations from a different angle. Hours later, as she collapsed into a chair in the staff room, her muscles aching and her designer shoes scuffed, Mr. Chen sat down beside her. "You know," he said, pouring her a cup of tea, "Mr. Anderson started just like this, learning every job in the hotel business from the ground up. That's why he still dresses casually when he visits. He never wants to forget where he came from." Rita sipped the tea thoughtfully, remembering how she had judged their owner based on his jeans and sneakers. "How long have you known him?" she asked. Mr. Chen smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Since before he owned his first hotel. He used to help me with luggage when he was just a guest. Always said he was learning the business from every angle. Now look at him, owns the whole chain but still helps guests with their bags when he sees someone struggling." As the night shift wound down, Rita found herself watching the early morning guests arrive. A young family walked in, their clothes wrinkled from travel, children half asleep on their feet. Without hesitation, she grabbed a luggage cart and approached them with a genuine smile, the kind of smile she wished she'd received on her first day of work. The mother's grateful look as Rita helped them to their room made something shift inside her. For the first time, she understood that luxury wasn't about designer clothes or expensive cars, it was about making people feel valued, regardless of their appearance or background. As she finally headed home in the early hours of the morning, Rita passed by the lobby where she had made her terrible mistake. The morning sun was just beginning to streak through the windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. She paused, looking at her reflection in the polished surfaces. The woman staring back at her looked different somehow, humbled, but also more confident in a way she hadn't been before. Her phone, which had once been her constant companion at the front desk, stayed untouched in her pocket. She had learned more in one night about real human connection than in all her previous months of work. As she pushed through the revolving doors into the crisp morning air, Rita smiled, knowing this was just the beginning of her journey. The true measure of luxury, she was learning, wasn't in the price tag, it was in the way you made others feel. A week into her "walking in their shoes" program, Rita found herself in the hotel's massive laundry room at 5 a.m. The humidity was overwhelming, and the constant hum of industrial washing machines filled the air. Her perfectly manicured nails were now trimmed short, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a practical uniform. She was working alongside Mrs. Patel, the head of housekeeping, a woman she had barely acknowledged in her previous role. "Every thread counts," Mrs. Patel explained, demonstrating how to properly fold the luxury linens. "These sheets tell guests a story about our care for them. When they slip into a perfectly made bed after a long journey, they feel at home." As Rita helped sort through mountains of laundry, she discovered small notes that guests had left behind, thank you messages to the housekeeping staff, written on hotel notepads. Mrs. Patel had kept each one, pinned to a bulletin board in the break room. "These remind us that we're not just cleaning rooms," she said, her eyes twinkling. "We're part of people's stories." Later that morning, while changing sheets in room 824, Rita found a worn teddy bear wedged between the mattress and wall. Moments later, the front desk called, a distraught child 2 states away couldn't sleep without his beloved Mr. Snuggles. Without hesitation, Rita volunteered to stay late, personally packaging the bear with a small note and arranging overnight shipping. The photo of the reunited child and bear, sent by grateful parents, now hung alongside the other memories on Mrs. Patel's bulletin board. During her kitchen rotation, Rita met Chef Laurent, whose thick French accent and passionate gestures had once intimidated her. Now, as she helped prep vegetables and plate room service orders, she saw a different side of him. He took pride in accommodating every dietary restriction and special request, no matter how challenging. "You see this omelette," he said one morning, showing her a perfectly plated breakfast. "They guessed, she is pregnant and craving very specific things. We make it exactly right, no pepper, extra mushrooms, just a hint of cheese. Why? Because somewhere out there, a future mama will start her day feeling cared for. This is not just food, it is love on a plate. One particularly memorable evening, Rita was assisting the concierge when an elderly gentleman approached the desk. His hands shook slightly as he explained that it was his 50th wedding anniversary. He and his late wife had spent their honeymoon at the hotel. He couldn't afford a room anymore but wanted to sit in the lobby for a few minutes, just to remember. Without thinking twice, Rita looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, who nodded approvingly. They upgraded an empty suite to anniversary decoration standards and invited the man to stay the night as the hotel's guest. That evening, as she served him dinner in the same spot where he and his wife had dined half a century ago, Rita understood what Mr. Anderson had meant about dignity being the true measure of luxury. The story spread through the hotel staff, eventually reaching Mr. Anderson's ears. He didn't make a big show of it, but the next morning, Rita found a handwritten note in her locker: "You're beginning to understand. Keep going." As weeks passed, Rita's transformation became evident to everyone. The other staff members, who had initially been skeptical of her presence in their departments, now welcomed her warmly. She learned that the night auditor moonlighted as a math tutor, helping staff members' children with homework during his breaks. The maintenance manager, who she had once dismissed as just the repair guy, turned out to be a former engineering professor who had left academia to work with his hands. One rainy afternoon, a group of teenagers entered the lobby, drenched from an unexpected downpour. They were clearly lost and out of place in the luxury hotel. The old Rita would have ushered them out immediately. Instead, she offered them towels and hot chocolate, learning they were part of a high school robotics team whose competition venue had flooded. Working with the events team, she quickly transformed an empty conference room into a makeshift practice space. Mr. Anderson, who happened to be passing by, joined in, sharing his own engineering background with the enthusiastic students. The team went on to win their regional competition, and months later, sent the hotel a trophy to display alongside the other memorabilia in the lobby. But perhaps the most profound lesson came from an unexpected source. While sorting mail in the back office, Rita discovered years' worth of guest comment cards that Mr. Chen had kept. Among them was a letter from 15 years ago, written by a young man who had been down on his luck. The hotel staff had treated him with kindness when he needed it most. That man turned out to be Mr. Anderson himself, before he had made his fortune. "You see," Mr. Chen explained when she asked him about it, "everyone has a story. That shabby coat might belong to a future CEO, that tired mother might be raising the next president, that confused elderly guest might have changed lives as a teacher. Our job isn't to judge their story, it's to be a positive part of it." The lesson hit home one evening when Rita was covering the front desk during a particularly busy check-in time. A man in paint-stained overalls approached, looking uncertain. Instead of seeing his clothes, Rita saw a person who deserved to be welcomed. He turned out to be a successful artist, in town for a gallery opening, who had come straight from his studio. He was so impressed by her genuine warmth that he later sent the hotel one of his paintings, a beautiful rendering of the lobby at sunset, capturing the moment when day shift and night shift staff crossed paths, all working together to create something greater than themselves. As her month of training neared its end, Rita realized that every interaction, every moment of service, was an opportunity to change someone's story. The luxury wasn't in the marble floors or crystal chandeliers, it was in the genuine care shown to every person who walked through those doors. One quiet evening, as she helped Mr. Chen with his rounds, he shared a final piece of wisdom. "You know what makes Mr. Anderson a great leader?" he asked, pausing by the window where the city lights twinkled below. "He never forgot what it feels like to be on the other side of the desk. That's not something you learn from books, it's something you learn from here," he said, placing his hand over his heart. As Rita's final week of training approached, a massive technology failure hit the hotel. The booking system crashed, leaving the staff to manage hundreds of reservations manually. It was the kind of crisis that would have once sent Rita into a panic. Instead, she saw it as an opportunity to put everything she'd learned into practice. The lobby was chaos when she arrived for her shift. Tired travelers lined up at the front desk, while phones rang continuously. Without hesitation, Rita jumped in, but not before asking Mr. Chen to bring water and snacks for the waiting guests. She had learned that small gestures could make a big difference in tense situations. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the crowd with genuine warmth, "I understand you're all tired and frustrated. We're experiencing technical difficulties, but I promise we'll take care of each one of you. For now, please enjoy some refreshments while we sort this out." Working with the efficiency she'd learned from housekeeping and the attention to detail she'd picked up from the concierge team, Rita began processing check-ins by hand. She remembered Mrs. Patel's words about every guest having a story, and took time to listen to each one. A businessman who had lost his wallet on the flight. A couple celebrating their anniversary. A single mother traveling with 3 exhausted children. Instead of seeing them as problems to be solved, she saw opportunities to make a difference. Mrs. Rodriguez watched from nearby, nodding approvingly as Rita handled each situation with grace. When an angry guest began shouting about his platinum member status, Rita remained calm. She remembered the lesson Mr. Anderson had taught her about dignity going both ways. "Sir," she said quietly, "I understand your frustration. You've had a long day, and this isn't the welcome you deserve. While we work on your room, would you like to enjoy a complimentary dinner in our restaurant? Chef Laurent makes an excellent steak." The guest's anger deflated, replaced by surprise at her genuine concern. By the time his room was ready, he was thanking her profusely and apologizing for his outburst. As the night progressed, Rita coordinated with every department she'd trained with. She knew exactly who to call and how to ask for help because she'd walked in their shoes. The maintenance team worked overtime to fix the system, fueled by the coffee Rita had arranged from the kitchen. The housekeeping staff stayed late to prepare rooms, while the concierge team helped manage the crowd. Around midnight, Mr. Anderson arrived, having heard about the crisis. He stood back, watching Rita in action. She had transformed from the dismissive receptionist he'd met weeks ago into a natural leader who understood the true meaning of hospitality. He observed as she handled a particularly challenging situation. A group of teenagers, clearly from modest means, walked in with a chaperone. They had been bumped from their budget hotel due to overbooking and were stranded. The old Rita would have turned them away. The new Rita remembered her own journey. She quickly arranged for the group to stay in several vacant suites at a heavily discounted rate, knowing Mr. Anderson's philosophy about helping others when they needed it most. What she didn't know was that the chaperone was a reporter working on a story about youth education programs. The next week, the hotel would be featured in a heartwarming article about businesses that give back to the community, bringing positive attention to the entire chain. As the crisis finally subsided in the early hours of the morning, Rita sat in the staff room with Mr. Chen, sharing a much-needed cup of tea. The old bellhop smiled knowingly. "You know," he said, "when you first started here, you saw this job as beneath you. Now you understand that no job is beneath anyone, it's how you do it that matters." Rita nodded, thinking about how much her perspective had changed. "I used to think luxury was about exclusivity," she replied. "Now I understand it's about inclusivity, making everyone feel special, regardless of who they are." The next day, Mr. Anderson called Rita to his office. She entered with confidence, no longer intimidated by the space where her journey had begun. "I've been watching your progress," he said, motioning for her to sit. "You've done more than just complete the training program, you've embodied its spirit. Tell me, what's the most important thing you've learned?" Rita thought carefully before answering. "I learned that true hospitality isn't about grand gestures or expensive surroundings. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and understanding that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Every guest who walks through our doors has a story, and we have the privilege of being part of it." Mr. Anderson smiled, pulling out a folder. "That's exactly why I'd like to offer you a new position. We're expanding our training program to all our hotels, and we need someone who understands its value firsthand. Someone who's experienced both sides of the desk." Rita's eyes widened as she read the job offer: Director of Guest Experience and Staff Development. "But sir," she hesitated, "after how I treated you that first night." "That night showed me who you were," he interrupted. "This past month has shown me who you can be. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who have learned from their mistakes." As Rita left the office, she passed by the front desk where her journey had begun. A new receptionist was checking in a guest in worn jeans and a t-shirt, treating him with the same respect as the businessman in the designer suit next to him. She smiled, remembering Mr. Chen's words about everyone having a story. Her own story had changed dramatically in just 1 month, but it wasn't about her transformation alone. It was about understanding that every interaction, every moment, was an opportunity to make someone else's story a little better. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Rita stood in the lobby watching guests arrive. Each face held a different story, a different journey. But now, instead of judging those stories, she was ready to help write them, one check-in at a time. 6 months into her new role as Director of Guest Experience and Staff Development, Rita stood before a group of hotel managers in the Grand Plaza's main conference room. The same room where, not long ago, she had helped those robotic students practice for their competition. Now, she was here to share her story and implement the training program that had changed her life. "Every guest who walks through our doors has value," she began, her voice confident yet humble. "I learned this lesson the hard way, and today, I'm here to help ensure no other staff member makes the same mistakes I did." The room was packed with managers from various Anderson hotel properties across the country. Among them sat Mr. Anderson himself, watching proudly as his former problem employee had become one of his most valuable assets. Rita's training program, now officially called the Dignity Project, had already transformed 3 hotels in the chain. Employee satisfaction was up, guest reviews had improved, and most importantly, the culture had shifted from one of judgment to one of understanding. As she shared her experiences, Rita noticed a young manager in the back row who reminded her of her former self: designer clothes, slightly dismissive attitude, constantly checking her phone. Instead of being annoyed, Rita saw an opportunity. During the lunch break, she approached the young woman. "I used to be exactly like you," Rita said, sitting down beside her. "Would you like to hear a story about the night I almost lost my job by judging the owner of this hotel chain based on his jeans and t-shirt?" The young manager's eyes widened, and her phone disappeared into her pocket. By the end of lunch, she had signed up to be the first participant in her hotel's new training program. One day, while reviewing feedback from various properties, Rita received an urgent call from the Beverly Hills location. A celebrity had thrown a fit about their room, and the staff was struggling to handle the situation. Instead of sending someone else, Rita decided to handle it personally. When she arrived, she found a scene similar to her own crisis night: frustrated guests, overwhelmed staff, and a general sense of chaos. The celebrity, a famous actor known for his difficult behavior, was demanding the presidential suite that had been booked by another guest. Rita approached him calmly, remembering Mr. Chen's wisdom about everyone having a story. Instead of being starstruck or intimidated, she treated him like any other guest who needed help. "Sir," she said warmly, "I understand you've had a challenging day. While we can't provide the presidential suite, I have something special in mind that might interest you." She proceeded to tell him about a newly renovated corner suite with a private terrace, one that hadn't been unveiled to the public yet. What she didn't mention was that this was the same suite where she had once helped the elderly anniversary guest relive his memories. The actor, surprised by her genuine approach and lack of fawning, agreed to take a look. As they walked to the suite, Rita asked about his current film project, showing interest in his work rather than his status. By the time they reached the room, his entire demeanor had changed. The next morning, the actor personally thanked the staff and left a generous tip for housekeeping. He later posted on social media about the incredible service at the hotel, but Rita was more proud of the thank you note he wrote to the housekeeping staff. Back at the Grand Plaza, Rita worked closely with Mrs. Rodriguez to refine the training program. They added a new component. Every management trainee had to spend time with Mr. Chen, learning from his decades of wisdom about human nature and hospitality. You know what makes this program special? Mr. Chen asked Rita one evening as they watched a new group of trainees learning the art of luggage handling. It's not just about teaching people how to do a job. It's about teaching them how to see the humanity in everyone they meet. The program's success caught the attention of the hospitality industry. Other hotel chains began asking about implementing similar training. Mr. Anderson received numerous offers to sell the program, but he declined them all. This isn't about making money, he told Rita during their monthly meeting. It's about changing the industry from the inside out. One person at a time, one interaction at a time. Rita understood perfectly. She had begun documenting the stories that emerged from the program. The housekeeper who had gone out of her way to help a guest with autism feel comfortable, the maintenance worker who had taught himself basic sign language to better communicate with deaf guests, the kitchen staff who prepared special meals for a guest with severe allergies at 2 a.m. 1 year after her own transformation, Rita stood in the lobby of the Grand Plaza, watching the sunset just as she had done countless times before. A young woman in shabby clothes walked in, clutching a worn backpack. The receptionist, one of Rita's first trainees, greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. Later, Rita learned that the young woman was a graduate student who had saved for months to stay one night at the luxury hotel while in town for a major interview. The staff had gone out of their way to make her stay special, and she had aced her interview the next day. 2 years later, that same woman returned, this time as a successful executive booking the hotel's largest conference room for her company's annual meeting. She specifically asked for the same receptionist who had treated her with dignity when she could barely afford the room. Rita kept a journal of these full-circle moments, each one a testament to Mr. Anderson's vision of hospitality that went beyond luxury to touch human hearts. The journal sat on her desk next to the nameplate that now read Rita Johnson, Senior Vice President of Corporate Culture and Training. But her favorite moments were still the quiet ones, helping an elderly guest find their room, assisting a flustered parent with their children's luggage, or simply sitting with Mr. Chen in the staff room, sharing stories over a cup of tea. "You've come a long way," Mr. Chen said during one such moment, "but you haven't forgotten where you started. That's what makes you perfect for this role." Rita smiled, watching a new group of trainees practicing their welcome greetings. "No," she replied, "I'll never forget. Every day, I see myself in someone new, and that's what keeps me going. Because everyone deserves a chance to learn, grow, and understand that true luxury isn't about what we have, it's about how we treat each other." 3 years after that fateful night when she had judged Mr. Anderson by his casual attire, Rita found herself preparing for the biggest event of her career. The Anderson Hotel Group was hosting its first Global Hospitality Summit, bringing together staff from all their properties worldwide. The venue? The same Grand Plaza Hotel where her journey had begun. The marble lobby that had witnessed her transformation was now adorned with welcome banners in different languages. Staff members from Dubai, Singapore, London, and dozens of other locations filled the space with a vibrant energy. Rita smiled as she watched Mr. Chen, now promoted to head of guest relations but still insisting on helping with luggage, teaching a group of international bellhops his signature greeting technique. "You see," he demonstrated, "it's not just about taking their bags. It's about making them feel welcome from the very first moment. A smile is the same in every language." Mrs. Rodriguez, who had recently celebrated her 20th year with the hotel, was conducting a masterclass in crisis management. She used Rita's story as a case study, though Rita still blushed every time she heard it told. Sometimes, Mrs. Rodriguez explained to her captivated audience, our greatest challenges become our greatest opportunities for growth. Just ask our senior vice president, who started her journey right here at this front desk. The summit's main event was the launch of the Dignity Project International, an expanded version of the training program that had transformed not just Rita, but hundreds of employees across the chain. The program now included cultural sensitivity training, language resources, and specialized modules for different regions. As Rita prepared to give the keynote speech, she felt a familiar presence beside her. Mr. Anderson, still wearing his characteristic casual attire, gave her an encouraging nod. Nervous? He asked, adjusting his simple black t-shirt, similar to the one he'd worn the night that changed everything. A little, Rita admitted, smoothing her blazer. It's one thing to train a hotel, but launching this globally? What if some cultures see luxury differently? Mr. Anderson smiled. That's exactly why you're the right person for this. You understand that true luxury transcends cultural boundaries because it's about human dignity. The grand ballroom fell silent as Rita took the stage. Faces from every corner of the world looked up at her, from the housekeepers of Tokyo to the concierges of Paris. She took a deep breath and began. 3 years ago, I thought I knew what luxury meant. I thought it was about designer labels, expensive cars, and judging people by their appearance. I was wrong. Real luxury is about something much more valuable, the way we make people feel. She shared stories from across the hotel chain, the Dubai team that had helped a lost elderly couple reunite with their tour group, the Singapore staff who had organized a last-minute wedding when a couple's original venue flooded, the London concierge who learned basic phrases in 12 languages to make international guests feel at home. These moments, Rita continued, aren't about the thread count of our sheets or the brand of our toiletries. They're about seeing the humanity in every person who walks through our doors. The presentation included video messages from guests whose lives had been touched by the hotel staff. The elderly anniversary guest, now a regular visitor, spoke about how the hotel had helped him preserve precious memories. The robotics team, now college students, shared how their experience had inspired them to create a scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in engineering. But the most powerful moment came when Mr. Anderson joined Rita on stage. Together, they unveiled the Anderson Hospitality Scholarship, a program designed to help service industry workers pursue education and advancement opportunities. This scholarship, Mr. Anderson announced, will be named in honor of Mr. Chen, whose wisdom and kindness have shaped not just this hotel, but our entire understanding of what hospitality means. The elderly bellhop, sitting in the front row, wiped tears from his eyes as the room erupted in applause. Rita remembered all the cups of tea and wise words he had shared during her training, and how his simple insights had helped shape the program that was now going global. After the presentation, Rita found herself back in the staff room where she had spent countless hours during her training. Mrs. Patel was there, still pinning thank you notes to her bulletin board, which had now expanded to cover an entire wall. Look at this, Mrs. Patel said, pointing to a new addition, a letter from a housekeeper in their Mumbai hotel who had gone through the training program. She writes that for the first time in her life, she feels proud to tell people what she does for a living. That's what this is all about. The summit concluded with a gala dinner, but not in the formal ballroom as everyone expected. Instead, Rita had arranged for it to be held in the staff cafeteria, transformed for the evening but still recognizably the heart of the hotel's daily operations. This is where the real magic happens, she explained to the international guests. This is where our staff members from every department come together, where barriers break down, and where we remember that we're all part of the same team. Chef Laurent, who had recently been promoted to culinary director, prepared a menu that combined dishes from every region where Anderson Hotels operated. As executives and housekeepers sat side by side, sharing stories and breaking bread, Rita saw her vision of true hospitality come to life. Late that night, after most guests had retired, Rita found herself back in the lobby with Mr. Chen and Mr. Anderson. The three of them stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle below, just as they had done so many times before. "You know what I love most about this hotel?" Mr. Chen mused. "Every night, when I leave, it looks different. The light changes, the people change, but the feeling of welcome stays the same." Mr. Anderson nodded. "That's because luxury isn't in the building or the furnishings. It's in the hearts of the people who work here." Rita looked at her mentor and her boss, two men who had taught her the true meaning of dignity in their own unique ways. "And in the way we see the hearts of those who come here," she added. As they stood there, a group of tired travelers walked through the revolving doors. Without hesitation, all three of them moved to help: the hotel owner, the senior vice president, and the head of guest relations, each grabbing a piece of luggage and offering genuine smiles. Because in the end, that's what the Dignity Project was all about: understanding that true luxury isn't about who you are or what you wear, but about how you make others feel. And in that moment, as they helped the grateful travelers to their rooms, Rita knew that her story had come full circle, but it wasn't just her story anymore. It had become part of something much bigger, a movement that was changing the hospitality industry, one human interaction at a time. 5 years after Rita's transformative encounter with Mr. Anderson, the Dignity Project had evolved beyond anything she could have imagined. What began as a lesson in humility at a single hotel had sparked a revolution in customer service across industries. Rita found herself sitting in her office, now located on the top floor of the Grand Plaza, reading an article in Forbes magazine about the Anderson method of customer service training. The morning sun streamed through her window, illuminating the wall of photographs that chronicled her journey. There was the original front desk where it all began, the first graduating class of the Dignity Project, and countless moments of genuine human connection captured across the globe. But her favorite photo was still the one of Mr. Chen teaching her how to properly handle luggage on her first day of training. A knock on her door interrupted her reflection. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, now Global Director of Operations, with exciting news. The Business Leadership Council wants to implement the Dignity Project in their corporate training programs, she announced. They say it's not just about hospitality anymore, it's about human connection in every business interaction. Rita wasn't entirely surprised. Over the past year, they'd received similar requests from retail chains, airlines, and even healthcare facilities. The principles of dignity and respect that she'd learned the hard way were proving universal. "You know what this means?" Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "Your mistake that night with Mr. Anderson might end up changing not just hotels, but how businesses everywhere treat people." Later that day, Rita visited the hotel's training center, now a state-of-the-art facility named the Chen Institute of Hospitality. Mr. Chen, though officially retired, still came in 3 days a week to share his wisdom with new trainees. She found him in his usual spot, teaching a group of executives from a major tech company. "You see," he was saying, "when you look at your screen instead of a person's face, you miss their story. And everyone who walks through your door, virtual or real, has a story worth hearing." The tech executives, all with their phones now tucked away, were hanging on his every word. Rita smiled, remembering her own phone-obsessed days at the front desk. That afternoon, she had a video call with the managers of all Anderson hotels worldwide. The screens showed faces from every continent, each with their own story of how the Dignity Project had transformed their property. The manager from their Tokyo location shared how they'd helped a group of stranded tourists during a typhoon, turning a potential crisis into a showcase of genuine care. The Dubai team reported on their new initiative, inspired by Rita's story, where local students shadowed hotel staff to learn about service and human connection. In Sydney, they'd partnered with a homeless shelter to provide hospitality training and job opportunities. "This is bigger than luxury hotels now," the London manager commented. "We're teaching people how to see humanity in everyone they meet." After the call, Rita walked through the Grand Plaza's lobby, now a teaching space as much as a functional hotel entrance. New employees learned alongside seasoned veterans, and guests often commented on the positive energy they felt upon entering. She paused at the front desk, where a young receptionist was checking in a guest in worn work clothes. The receptionist's genuine smile and warm welcome made Rita's heart swell with pride. On the desk sat a small plaque with words that had become the hotel's unofficial motto: "Every guest has a story. Be part of it." That evening, Mr. Anderson called an unexpected meeting in the staff cafeteria. The room was packed with employees from every department, from housekeeping to management. Chef Laurent had prepared a special dinner, and there was an air of anticipation. Mr. Anderson, still in his characteristic casual attire, stood up to address the room. "5 years ago," he began, "someone judged me by my clothes." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd as all eyes turned to Rita. That moment could have ended with a firing. Instead, it led to something extraordinary. He went on to announce that the Dignity Project would become a non-profit foundation, dedicated to spreading its message beyond the hospitality industry. The foundation would offer scholarships, training programs, and resources to any organization committed to treating people with dignity. And who better to lead this foundation, he smiled, than the person whose mistake started it all? Rita felt tears welling up as she accepted the position. Looking around the room, she saw Mrs. Patel dabbing her eyes with her apron, Mrs. Rodriguez beaming proudly, and Mr. Chen giving her a knowing wink. Later that night, after most staff had gone home, Rita found herself back in the lobby with Mr. Chen and Mr. Anderson, their traditional spot for meaningful conversations. "Did you ever imagine," she asked Mr. Anderson, "that my terrible mistake would lead to all this?" He chuckled. "Actually, I had a feeling that night that something special would come from it. Not because of the mistake, but because of how you handled what came after." Mr. Chen nodded wisely. The biggest changes often come from the smallest moments. It's not about the mistake, it's about what you learn from it. As they talked, a group of new trainees was practicing greetings at the front desk. Among them was a young man who reminded Rita of herself, previously dismissed from another hotel for poor attitude, now getting a second chance through the Dignity Project. Life has a funny way of coming full circle, she mused, watching him learn the same lessons she had. The next morning, Rita arrived early to find a surprise on her desk, a frame containing her original name tag from her receptionist days, alongside her new business card as foundation director. Below them was a note in Mr. Chen's handwriting: "Every person who walks through our doors changes us a little. Sometimes, they change everything." She hung it on her wall next to the photo of her first day of training. As she stepped back to admire it, her phone buzzed with a message: another major corporation wanting to implement the Dignity Project. But instead of heading straight to her office, she took the elevator down to the lobby. There, she found the young trainee from the night before, struggling with his first solo shift at the front desk. She walked up beside him, just as Mr. Chen had done for her years ago. "Would you like to hear a story?" she asked, smiling. "It's about a receptionist who thought she knew everything about luxury, until the night she judged the wrong guest by his clothes." The trainee's eyes widened as she began to tell her tale, and Rita knew that the cycle of learning, growth, and transformation would continue. Because in the end, true luxury wasn't about beautiful buildings or expensive amenities, it was about the simple dignity of treating every person as if their story mattered. And at the Grand Plaza Hotel, every story did. 10 years had passed since the night Rita had judged Mr. Anderson by his casual attire. The Grand Plaza Hotel was hosting a special anniversary celebration, not of its founding, but of the moment that had sparked a global movement in human dignity and service. The lobby was filled with familiar faces from around the world. Mrs. Patel, now retired but still consulting for the foundation, was showing off her latest collection of thank you notes, which had been turned into a digital archive of human kindness. Chef Laurent, whose culinary training program now helped underprivileged youth build careers in hospitality, was supervising the preparation of a special anniversary menu that told the story of the Dignity Project through food. Mr. Chen, now in his 80s but still sharp as ever, sat in his favorite lobby chair, surrounded by a group of young trainees hanging on his every word. "You see that spot right there?" he pointed to the front desk. "That's where one person's biggest mistake became everyone's greatest lesson." Rita stood at the entrance, greeting arriving guests for the celebration. The elderly anniversary guest who had once sought just a few minutes in the lobby was now a regular speaker at their training sessions, sharing his story of how a simple act of kindness had helped him heal from loss. The robotics team members, now successful engineers, had created a technology division within the foundation, developing tools to make hospitality more accessible to all. Even the difficult celebrity whose situation Rita had handled years ago had become an unexpected ally, funding scholarships for service industry workers seeking education. He arrived at the celebration wearing jeans and a t-shirt, a deliberate nod to the story that had started it all. Mr. Anderson, his hair now silver but his style unchanged, stood beside Rita. "Look at what you've built," he said proudly, gesturing to the gathered crowd. "This is so much bigger than a training program now." He was right. The Dignity Project Foundation had expanded far beyond its hospitality roots. Their training methods were being used in schools to combat bullying, in healthcare to improve patient care, and in corporate environments to transform workplace culture. The simple principle of seeing the humanity in everyone had resonated across industries and cultures. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had recently published a book about the transformation of customer service in the digital age, was signing copies in the corner. Each book contained a special chapter about the night that changed everything, though Rita still blushed every time she read it. As the evening progressed, Rita took the stage to make a special announcement. 10 years ago, I stood behind that desk, she pointed to the front desk, thinking I knew everything about luxury and success. Today, I stand before you to announce the next chapter of our journey. She revealed the Foundation's newest initiative, the Second Chance program, designed to help people who had lost jobs due to poor customer service or attitude issues rebuild their careers through dignity-based training. The program would provide not just job skills, but life skills, mentorship, and a support network. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just like I got mine." The first recipient of the program was in the audience, the young man who had reminded Rita of herself years ago. He had completed the training and was now managing a hotel in Chicago, known for its exceptional customer service and inclusive atmosphere. As part of the celebration, they unveiled a new installation in the lobby, a digital wall displaying real-time messages from guests and staff around the world, sharing moments of dignity and connection. The wall's first message was from a housekeeper in their Singapore hotel: "Today, I helped a guest feel at home in a strange city. That's not just my job, it's my purpose." Later in the evening, Rita found herself in a quiet corner with Mr. Chen and Mr. Anderson, their traditional spot for reflection. They watched as current and former staff members mingled with guests, each carrying their own story of transformation. "You know what makes me proudest?" Mr. Chen mused. "It's not the awards or the recognition. It's watching people discover their own capacity for kindness." Mr. Anderson nodded. "We didn't just change a business model. We changed how people see each other." Rita thought about her own journey, from the judgmental receptionist to the leader of a global movement in human dignity. "We showed that luxury isn't about exclusivity," she added. "It's about making everyone feel valued." As the celebration wound down, a young woman approached Rita. She was wearing worn clothes and carrying a backpack, a student, Rita guessed, probably traveling on a tight budget. But before the young woman could speak, every staff member nearby had already moved to welcome her with genuine warmth. "I saw your story online," the student said shyly. "I've been saving up to stay here one night, just to experience what real hospitality feels like." Rita smiled, remembering her own lessons about judgment and worth. She personally showed the young woman to her room, a suite usually reserved for VIPs. "Everyone who walks through our doors is a VIP," she explained. Because everyone's story matters. The next morning, Rita arrived early to find the lobby already bustling. Mr. Chen was at his usual post, teaching a new group of trainees. Mrs. Patel was updating the digital archive with fresh stories from the celebration. The young student from the night before was checking out, her eyes bright with an experience she would never forget. As Rita watched the daily rhythm of the hotel unfold, she realized that the true luxury of the Grand Plaza wasn't in its marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It was in the genuine smiles, the warm greetings, and the countless small moments of human connection that happened every day. A new group of trainees was gathering for their first day of orientation. Rita joined them, just as she did every month, to share her story. But this time, she added something new. 10 years ago, I learned that our biggest mistakes can become our greatest teachers, she told them. But what I've learned since then is even more important, that every interaction is an opportunity to change someone's story. We're not just in the hospitality business. We're in the business of human dignity. As she finished speaking, she noticed Mr. Anderson standing at the back of the room, wearing his signature jeans and t-shirt. He gave her a knowing smile, and she knew that though their story had begun with a mistake, it had grown into something far more powerful, a movement that proved that true luxury wasn't about appearance or price tags, but about the simple dignity of treating every person as if their story mattered. And at the Grand Plaza Hotel, it always would.